appropriately. Truth and acknowledgement are critical in building mutual respect and connection across the barriers of heritage and difference. We begin this effort to acknowledge what has been buried by honoring the truth. We pay respects to their elders, past and present. Please take a moment to consider the many legacies of violence, displacement, migration, and settlement that brings us together here today. And please join us in uncovering such truth at any and all public events. Dr. Lee, the panelists, and AAC would like to acknowledge that America resides on native lands of indigenous people across the United States, and that America's promise and economic prosperity advanced on the backs and toils of indigenous Black and brown peoples whose DNA and blood are enshrined in its soil. Thank you for that. Now I just want to honestly introduce our lovely host, Dr. Lee. He has earned a PhD in Arts Administration, Education, and Policy from the Ohio State University. His dissertation investigated the implementation and management of public and private arts endowments, cultural trust funds, and companion foundations at state arts agencies. From 2012 to 2019, Dr. Lee presented research on community arts development, grassroots and arts funding, organizational behavior, management and theory in the arts at the Association of the Arts of Administration for Educators, the National Arts Marketing Project, and the Social Policies and the Arts Conferences. If you want to know more about Dr. Lee or any of our panelists, once again, you can log on to our website at aacdmv.org and you will find their bios and more information about everyone as well as the events. So now I am going to pass it along to Dr. Lee.
Thank you, Kendra. I too welcome the panel and thank you and Paula for helping to prepare this. What we're doing is having a discussion about what happens after COVID. The discussion involves many organizations going into COVID and into Black Lives Matter. We're advancing on diversity initiatives, whether they got far or still in the planning stage. But as these times are changing, what will it look like after COVID? And that's when we're going to raise many issues. We hope to have some solutions, but this is a conversation and we're going to have the panelists introduce themselves. Then I'll ask each panelist a few questions. They'll tell about their university, they'll tell about their work, their current work, and any books or programs that they're currently doing. And then we'll move into other discussions. There will be a time for Q&A. So please put your questions into the Q&A box. Also, someone is monitoring the chat to make sure that we don't miss any questions. In the Q&A box in the lower left-hand corner, you will see a thumbs up. And that usually is an indication that if you like the question, you can click on the thumb and it'll move the question up. I don't see it at this moment, but that's usually what happens when you type a question into the box. And one question's already, we're gonna see the whole panel in this session. So let's get started. We're gonna start with Ruby Lopez Harper, who's a senior programmer at the American for the Arts. She'll give her official title. Ruby, the originator of the National Arts Marketing Project, and she has done great work with that. Ruby works with many of the up-and-coming brown and Black people who are in arts administrators and as in American for the Arts, as well as outside American for the Arts. So Ruby's going to tell us a little bit about her work at American for the Arts, and she's going to begin that conversation. So Ruby, welcome. And
thank you. Yeah, so Ruby Lopez Harper. I'm the Senior Director of Local Arts Advancement at Americans for the Arts. Just to give a little bit of a snapshot about myself, I identify as a Mexican mother, wife, dancer, photographer, poet, and social justice warrior. My pronouns are she, her, hers. And I'm going to share in the chat box just some information about the tribal lands. I'm calling in today from Silver Spring, Maryland, land of the Nacotchtank tribe. And the link I'm sharing in the chat there is just information about tribal lands in the DC metro area. If you're interested and want to learn a little bit more, I do invite you to do that. Americans for the Arts is the lead service and advocacy organization for arts and culture around the country. The role that I play specifically is related to supporting 4,500 local arts agencies and the work that they do in communities. So that includes field education, tools, research, and resources. We've been doing a lot of work around the pandemic and providing tools and information and access to resources for individuals who are either themselves creative workers or organizations that are also trying to navigate this, in addition to resources and tools for local arts agencies as well. As Keith said, I've done a lot of work. I take mentorship and knowledge passing, intergenerational conversations very seriously. I find it really important that we all didn't arrive where we are. Other people led the way for us. And so I honor the elders and the shoulders that I stand on by lifting others up with me and making sure that we're getting information out to folks so that they can do the best that they are able to do within a system that isn't designed to support, receive, or foster us. And whether that means working in tandem with systems that need to be redressed, or finding new ways and amplifying those emerging voices, that is something that I feel a lot of passion around. So I'm really excited to be a part of this panel today. Thank you so much for the invitation, Keith.
Okay, and Ruby, while we have you, go ahead and tell us a little bit about the scholarships in recent years that American for the Arts have been giving to leaders of color and people with disabilities. So go ahead and tell us about those a little bit.
Yeah, I think it's one of the, again, just kind of exciting resources. We as an organization have access to assets and, content. And one of the ways that we have used our space is to provide scholarship support. So in the before times, which was pre-pandemic, that really manifested around tiered levels. So some of it was a conference registration that we would make available. We had some scholarships that were more in depth, and so it was travel assistance and lodging and conference registration, and then some of them it was a reimbursement, and so we were able to really kind of tier the support that we could make available in order to try to maximize the number of folks that we could support. We started really intentionally making that support available to marginalized communities. And so doing a scan of the membership that we know and work with in the field, seeing where the gaps are, and trying to also understand where the shortage of resources are. And so we've had a long-standing, actually this is our 20th anniversary of supporting emerging leaders in the field, a long-standing commitment to amplifying and lifting up younger voices and the different ways that they work than what we're used to. And so being able to provide support for emerging leaders to attend our annual conference and our National Arts Marketing Project conference as well has always been of particular importance. We added leaders of color to the mix, I want to say about three or 4 years ago, and have seen steadying increase, right? We know that folks of color are not participating at the same rate that our white colleagues are, don't have the same access, aren't necessarily working in well-resourced organizations that can support their professional development. And so to be able to provide that was really meaningful, and then piggybacked that with developing an affinity program for leaders of color that includes several different components. We've also added and reimagined a scholarship for people with disabilities to try to bring in that voice and that representation, because it does enrich the conversation. And I think when we think about all of the different ways that we could be activating within our communities, thinking holistically, for us, cultural equity has been a hallmark of the way that we approach this conversation. So, you know, it complicates some things sometimes in how much we're able to do, but it also gives us depth and breadth to have conversations with different communities around equity indicators that matter the most to them. And then we've also focused on organizations from rural communities. We've added elements for, you know, organizations with small budgets. And in the time of COVID, we have been really trying to create programming that is affordable and in most cases free as we're able to do that. So really trying to find ways that we can support the field as everyone's trying to navigate this time.
And thank you, Ruby. And I think it's important that you brought out some of the aspects. And I know that we're talking about the field at large and public advocacy, public access to art, public art, and those are the types of things that are American for the arts. I'm going to turn the conversation now to Cheryl, and I'm going to let her introduce herself, her university. Cheryl brings a different perspective. She's a associate professor and associate dean at Belmont University and the Curb Institute. I think it's the Institute. She'll describe it all. And she comes from a law background, and she also comes from a background where it's mostly entertainment and commercial. So she brings a different perspective to this conversation. So Cheryl, would you please introduce yourself and tell us about your university and your research and all the wonderful things that you are doing?
Good afternoon. Thank you, Keith, and good afternoon to all the participants. I am Cheryl Carr. I am Associate Professor of Music Business and Associate Dean of the Curb College of Entertainment and Music Business here at Belmont University. The Curb College offers studies in the business of the entertainment industries, including an AACSB accredited music business program. We're one of the only such programs that is AACSB accredited. We also offer film and media studies and other programs that prepare students to work in the creative and entertainment industries. So as Associate Dean, I serve and support the mission of the Curb College through administration of its programs. And my background, as you mentioned, Keith, is as an entertainment and intellectual property attorney, and also a vocalist who has transitioned to academia. Prior to obtaining my law degree, I also studied public administration, so I bring these backgrounds varied from arts, law, as well as public policy to academia. As an associate professor, I teach copyright law, music industry contract law, and diversity in the entertainment industries. And then I write and present on career empowerment in the law, arts, and diversity in the entertainment industry. I'm author of Music Copyright Law, co-author, and author of Music Business Careers, which talks about career duality in the creative industries, which was released last year. And I'm excited to be here, part of this conversation this afternoon.
Okay, and Cheryl, what I would like for you to do is you've also hosted your own diversity symposium at Belmont before, and you also have participated in Blackout Tuesdays, which was a recent event of the music industry. Could you tell us about those initiatives and why they were important for you to do? Because if we know that Belmont has a primarily majority of, not many African Americans attend Belmont. And
Yes.
so you hosting these events at Belmont, and we also didn't know that Nashville is the home of country music. You also forgot to mention your research on Motown, that you did some research on Motown earlier in your career. So again, you're bringing all these diverse interests to a majority Caucasian campus in majority Caucasian city. So how has that been received? How has it influenced your work? Could you just tell us more about those kind of initiatives that you've been doing?
The symposium that you mentioned was a really exciting and successful endeavor. It was It was well attended, and we are looking forward to repeating it this year, though we will be doing it virtual. The impetus for that, as you say, Keith, you know, when you are in a predominantly white institution, which Belmont is, we are nevertheless an institution that at our core, our mission is to engage and transform the world. And that includes all of our students from all backgrounds and our faculty and staff. And so as an academic institution, it's our mission to investigate what's happening and why, and to be a part of identifying solutions. So the Diversity in Entertainment Industry Symposium, which we call Minding the Gap, was created last year to identify gaps in the entertainment industry, to have a bit of a survey of what's going on, starting with the Nashville music industry, which really is not just country music. It really expands beyond that. And our symposium brought attention to that expanse. So for example, one of the sessions, which was extremely popular, well attended, and excellently done, was facilitated by Professor Eric Holt here at Belmont about the urban music scene here in Nashville. So that Nashville actually does have an urban music scene. It is thriving, and it's certainly distinct from an urban music scene that you might find in Atlanta or some other cities that have larger Black populations, but it is nonetheless Nashville's own urban music scene. And it was our pleasure and really our privilege to highlight that as part of the Diversity Symposium. We also looked at the nonprofit art sector, which is also thriving in Nashville. Again, not just country music, but of course our symphony, the Nashville Opera Company, which I sit on their board of directors, the Nashville Film Festival, the International Black Film Festival. All of those entities reside here and are really an important part of Nashville's arts identity. So our goal was to bring attention to what's happening in each of those spaces and to invite dialogue and to identify solutions. We also have been cultivating relationships with the arts community in Nashville as a whole. And so we have a relationship with the National Museum of African American Music. And recently, I've been moderating a series of webinars that look at some of these diversity and entertainment issues, particularly post the racial unrest that we've seen since June. And so one of those webinars really focused on Blackout Tuesday, which you mentioned. And many folks know about Blackout Tuesday, but what one knows might be different from what the originators of Blackout Tuesday really intended. So on the one hand, it was Jamila Thomas and Breonna Taylor. I'm not sure I'm pronouncing her name correctly, but they are the two women who started Blackout Tuesday, which they started as "the show must be paused." The Blackout Tuesday nomenclature came along later because the pausing that they had in mind was really for the music industry to pause and recognize that Black lives matter in the entertainment industry too. And that Black lives matter in a way that we need to step back as an industry and take a look at how they maybe haven't mattered so much and retool and create some initiatives to address that going forward. So the webinar was a way for us to engage in a dialogue. We invited some participants in the Nashville music industry to be part of that conversation. And I was really interested in doing it for our students here, as well as for the music industry in Nashville and anyone who was interested in that particular topic. So that was exciting to host that webinar. I think it was a great discussion. And then my own personal involvement in Blackout Tuesday was to take that pause, which was a challenge. that the originators of the initiative really wanted to take that pause and to identify what I could personally do to advance the cause of diversity, equity, and inclusion in the entertainment industry, which I did. I was pleased to be able to write to assist in writing the solidarity statement for an arts organization here in Nashville. So those are some of the things that I've been involved in.
Okay, and that makes a perfect segue to Anthony Meyers, whose experiences led to the creation of Leading Change Makers as a consulting and training company. I met Anthony as a part of one of the courses that I was taking through my membership at American for the Arts, Arts Administrators Essentials, and he was talking to future arts administrators. Most of the people in that cohort were also Caucasian. So again, there were few African Americans taking advantage of some of these opportunities, and we'll get to that level of discussion later. So Anthony, I think this is a great segue, and what we have here is we started off with Ruby talking about the field at large, and then Cheryl actually talking about some things in academia, and now we're back into career development and professional development and how those things occur. So take it away, Anthony.
Thank you so much, Dr. Lee. I'm so thrilled to be here with my fellow panelists and with all of the attendees. Again, my name is Anthony Meyers. I'm an arts administrator, public grant maker, consultant, facilitator, researcher, and writer. My entry into the arts was actually as an artist myself. I have a background in dance, voice, drama, and literature. Growing up, I had no idea that there was such a role as an arts administrator. And over 2 decades later, I have worked with several cultural institutions in the New York tri-state area in program development, fundraising, strategic planning, and grant administration. I have a master's degree in organizational change management and certification in leadership and change from the New School. And my research interests are in authentic leadership theory, frameworks that consider the transfer of learning that goes beyond the learning event itself, and thinking about building community around learning and in the internalization of learning, as well as researching power, how power manifests within institutions, within art sectors, and how does power and influence move across stakeholders, across those who have access to power and those who don't.
Okay, Anthony, would you also tell us about how you came to creating Leading Change Makers? What factors in your life? You graduated, and then what's next?
Sure. Well, my work in the arts sector, I really stumbled again upon arts administration as a field. And while working within institutions, I was really interested in learning what leadership, what that journey could look like for me. There weren't really any role models for me that looked like me or had similar shared social identities as me. Again, I've worked in this sector for 2 decades. And so I wanted to learn leadership. So I started participating in professional development workshops and seminars and fellowship programs. And they really focused a lot on the hard skills, budgets and public speaking and program management, but they weren't really dealing with navigating people and navigating interpersonal dynamics and navigating our identities in workspaces and organizational culture. And so for me, I wanted to create a learning space where professionals, especially professionals of color, but all professionals within the arts sector can come together and really talk about what is our authentic and unique approaches to the work that we do? How can we build an authentic approach to our own leadership? And also, how can we engage the social space of organizational culture in a way that's authentic, but also uncovers dynamics that are not positive affirming? And so I created Leading Change Makers 2 years ago. We have been leading workshops in New York City and across the country. We've presented at a few conferences, and we actually have a few public workshops coming this fall, as well as presenting some workshops at the Arts Administrators of Color convening coming up in November.
And Cheryl, I want to come back to you, and what your book was describing was career dualities. Does anything that Anthony said relate to how people were creating careers and developing their own careers in arts administration?
Career duality is a term that I developed to describe the intersection of one's proclivity to be both artistic and analytical, as many of us who work in the arts, particularly on the administrative side of things, are both. And when it comes time to make a career decision, because one has both of those identities, it can be really challenging to decide whether or not to go that artistic route, which Anthony talked about. That's his background, was as an artist. That's also my background, is as an artist.
It's also my background.
As an artist, right? And so that is our draw. We're all drawn to the arts, but there is also the proclivity for many of us to have an analytical side that wants to be expressed. And sometimes we express it because by necessity, you have to take care of your own business as an artist. Sometimes that's the reason, but sometimes you're really drawn to analytical activity. I really enjoy practicing law. I enjoy being an analytical person. That's very much a part of who I am. And I wouldn't want to leave behind, though, the part of me that is artistic. So it really is describing how to make career decisions around being the blend of both artist and an analytical, a person who is analytically inclined.
And I'm going to let Ruby get in on this conversation because I know she came to arts administration a little bit differently. Throughout this webinar, we're going to pose several polls, and we're sharing the results with the audience as well, so that everyone can see who's in attendance. And what we find is that a lot of people attend because they wanted to know more about this topic, and I certainly hope they will. But we also look at the duality, and I think what we shows here in the polls that a lot of us are artists and a lot of us are administrators. So these factors about how do you balance between being an artist and administrator. And then we bring in Ruby, who's in public policy, and Cheryl, your background is in public policy, but oftentimes we don't even think about public art in the same spirit as we think about studio arts training and arts administrator. Is that other thing that government does, but really there's a connector here. So Ruby, how did you come to this field? Are you an artist as well? I know you appreciate art, but are you an artist also?
Oh my word. Yeah. I would say by soul I am a dancer, but I have had a torrid love affair with photography. And I have also had some of my poetry published. So I definitely have multiple ways of expression and engaging in creativity. And, you know, for me, it's been important over the years to maintain an embrace of that. Even recently, we celebrated International Dance Day with some colleagues, and we did a video montage of a piece to a song by a friend of mine. So, you know, to even be able to find ways to activate creativity in this time where we can't be together and, you know, going to the park to just move isn't really always an option anymore. So, you know, for me, art's just been, and it took until I was in my 30s to realize how distinct we define our artistic side, and yet how embedded it is. I think especially within communities of color, it's just what we do. It's just who we are. But I didn't ascribe being an artist until I started activating into Eurocentric art forms. So I started dancing when I was a sophomore in high school, and that was when I started doing art. But the reality is I'd been singing since I could put words together. I'd been dancing since I could stand on my own 2 feet. I'd been listening to music. It just every single day. Art has just been. you know, as far as arts administration, it was never something that I thought or even knew was a thing until I was doing it. And I often forget that my first foray into arts administration was as president of a board of trustees that ran a small community theater in Grove City, Ohio. And I did that for a number of years. Gosh, I want to say I was involved for a good 8 years. And that was in addition to my like corporate job. And so, you know, you forget the different entry points and you forget the different ways that we find ourselves doing this work. And it isn't until we know that there's a formal language and vocabulary that you realize that there is a track and that there are, you know, real jobs attached to all of these great things that we love doing. You know, I really solidified my arts administration job when I started working at the Greater Columbus Arts Council in Columbus, Ohio. I went into that job by way of corporate foundation work. And when I was, you know, I didn't go to college like a lot of people. I went to a small community college. It took me 6 years to get a 2-year degree. I really tried to be an accountant, but it just didn't quite work out that way. So I have a lot of accounting background, but I just gave up and took my general studies and left because I was like, I'm done with school. I don't want to do school anymore. It's a lot. And so the job really was interesting at the council because it began as a part-time finance and administration coordinator and a part-time grants coordinator. And so I was really able to, I think, in this really magical way, bring two things that were really woven into the tapestry of my skill set and really bring those to bear in a wonderful way. After about a year, they said, you know, pick one or the other because there's too much work. You're doing a great job, but we really need more people. Pick one. I picked grants administration because I really love the idea and the manifestation of having resources and pairing them with people who needed resources and then watching them be amazing and do great work and thrive and you know, to feel that there was even just a glimmer of influence that I was able to have by leveraging resources that were intended for the community was just really exhilarating. And so everything's just kind of grown from there. And I think that has, you know, proliferated into the other ways that I've activated within the field, you know, doing, you know, speaking for college classes to let them know, like, yes, you're here, but like, there's so many ways to get where you want to go. And here are all the different ways that you can get there and all the different things that you can do. And, you know, also sharing different strategies with folks that are new into the administration field, the things that they don't teach you in college, because there's still a big gap between the book stuff that you learn and the real world application that has to, I think, also be paired together. And also then, you know, the politics of what we have to do in office settings and the, you know, the supremacist structures that we have to navigate. I think all of those things, to be able to pass that knowledge and those strategies and to keep people excited about being a part of this field has really been something that I have found really fulfilling.
And Ruby, what you point out is that various access to get into arts administration. And I think all of you have pointed that out. And some of you know my trajectory was I started off as a writer in high school, became editor of the newspaper and the literary magazine, then went to college, literary magazine, African American studies, and arts administration. So I was constantly changing between arts administration and African American studies as a concentration while maintaining a literature group. But yet we find that often in academic programs, we find that people are tracked toward visual arts or performance arts. There's little room in between to create entry points of entry. And if we look closely at African Americans and how they come to arts administration, many come through museum studies, which is not equated as arts administration. I think the Association of African American Museums is doing a fine job at developing public history scholars. They come from public history and cultural studies to the arts. I don't see much of pairing of management skills with those degrees yet. So that's one of the areas that I think we should look at. Moving forward, what do, because Ruby, one of the reasons that I really wanted you on, because your trajectory was very different from mine. I went from, you know, undergraduate degree in arts administration, actually high school with concentration in arts administration, college degree in arts administration, graduate degree, arts administration, PhD, arts administration. So it's been arts administration and African American studies continuously. However, you forged a unique space and opportunity for career advancement. My trajectory hasn't been as economically prosperous. And so, but fulfilling and rewarding because I get to do what I want to do. But again, why will we begin to tell African Americans, arts administration, museum, cultural studies, and that's the question that we're opening up to the entire panel. Why will we encourage someone to do this? And then we're going to move into what our institutions, because sometimes we get people to go to these institutions and they simply don't get the benefits of being at those institutions. And so I'm going to let Anthony start with that.
Sure. You know, I think, you know, you mentioned that a number of African American staff members come in through the sort of museum studies background, but some come from a total non-arts background, and you know, accounting or museum, like museum security guards. I mean, let's not, you know, let's talk about the various departments that staff come through and can evolve and have opportunities to evolve if they are given the chance, and if the hiring and promotion strategies within institutions allow for growth from anyone within an institution. So, you know, I think that, you know, for me, again, I didn't know that arts administration was a field. I'm surprised to hear that you were interested in arts administration in high school. But you know, for me, even pursuing my master's degree was not in arts administration, partially because I had been doing this work on the experience level. And I think, you know, this conversation of who gets hired for what positions based on what titles or what degrees you have is a part of this exchange as well. I don't know if my organizational change management masters will help me with a leadership position, but I wanted to use it to bring my skills back to institutions to think about how do we grow, how do we thrive, and how do we manage change. So we're in the midst of this COVID era, we're in the midst of social unrest. We're in a period of time where I had been, you know, working with colleagues for years who wanted to create changes within institutions, but, you know, we had only gotten so far with the conversations. You know, it's like, oh, we want to talk about equity and inclusion. We want to talk about these practices, but people aren't fully ready yet to fully go there. But we sort of inch our way. Now we're in a space where all of these dialogues are opening up. So how do we apply our knowledge and skills now to take advantage of the moment? So I think that's the thing that I'm very interested in, and even coming into this conversation today, how do we take advantage of the moment now to seize opportunities for folks not only to advance that already work within institutions, but think about the ways that we can attract people of color to cultural institutions in all types of roles.
And one of the reasons that I wanted that, and we're going to go to Cheryl next. I started in high school because I was a writer and I couldn't get my poems published. And I looked at the infrastructure and there were people not publishing Black poetry. And the only way I said, well, in order to do this, I'm going to have to manage my own magazine. And so that led to it. And my school had distributing clubs, education clubs. Anyway, they were teaching business skills through distributive education. So I matched that with my literature. So again, for me, that led to arts administration. I knew about it because I was always looking at the NEA and the NEA, and I realize I'm much older than some of you here. So I was like, you know, back when the NEA was coming into existence almost. But so I've seen these different shifts and periods. So that's why I knew. But you're right. Many people don't know about arts administration. I'm finding that many people who are working in museums, especially African American museums, don't know about arts administration. And they are often turned to these administrative components that we do in marketing, grant, fund development. They turn to MBA programs and those people to do it. And sometimes I find that the MBA is great, but they don't necessarily have the cultural sensitivity to work with arts institutions and arts organizations. Same thing for public administration, I think, that, you know, there's a difference between the way an MBA and even a master's in arts administration works in public administration. A whole different set of principles, yet they're still related. And I'm gonna turn to you now, Cheryl.
I would like to share a story of how I came to be interested in this whole area. I, like Anthony, Keith, am surprised to hear you say that you knew about arts administration in high school and you had a vision for that for yourself. I think that was really very unusual. And because in general, I think people in high school don't always know what direction they want to go in. And then you knew not only what direction you wanted to go in, but it happens to be something that is obscure to many, or not, it's just not well known. When I lived and worked in Washington, D.C., I would often have family and friends who'd come to town, and they would want to go to the museums on the mall. And so I went to the museums on the mall all the time. I wanted to, but also I wanted to take family and friends when they'd come in town. And so on what must have been, I don't know, maybe my 5th visit or more to the African Museum of Art, not the African American Museum of Art. This was way many years before that even existed. The African Museum of Art, because we didn't have the African American one, so that's the one that we would go to. And I had been many, many times, and I was concerned about or really curious about the nature of the holdings there. And I thought that art in Africa was broader than what I felt were the holdings that you would see in the exhibits, though I didn't have any particularly strong background in African art. It was just a hunch that I had and a curiosity that I had. So I sat down and I wrote a letter to the then curator, who has since passed away, and said what I just said to you, that I'm curious as to why I don't see more textiles and color. And it looks like it's mostly, you know, utilitarian objects, which I actually now understand and have a greater appreciation for the role of that kind of artistic exhibit. But at the time, it was just a curiosity primarily. And I said, you know, to my knowledge, Western art has been very much influenced by African art. How come you don't have exhibits that show how Picasso was influenced by African art, or how some others who we really highly value and esteem their work, it's, you know, how it was influenced by African art. And I never expected to hear from him or anything. It was just me getting something off my chest. And he called me and asked me to come down and visit with him. And I did. And I met not only him, but his co-curator, Rosalind Walker, a wonderful woman. Rosalind, if you're out there, hello. You really made such a positive impact on me. An African-American woman who had her PhD, I guess in African art, I'm not really sure. But she and I debated because she wanted me to fully appreciate why they had the holdings that we did. And she educated me. she took time to just sort of explain some things to me, open my mind, and help me to think about things differently. And then she asked me, because she knew I was in law school at the time, have you ever thought about studying art law? And I said, I don't know what that is. I didn't know that there was such a thing. She was kind enough to set me up with the general counsel of the Smithsonian, who took time to sit down with me and talk to me about what it might look like to be a practitioner in that area. And it changed my whole perspective on law school, because up to that point, I didn't know exactly what I wanted to do with law school. It turned into entertainment law, partly because art law is a tough nut to crack as a practitioner, really tough. Only so many museums, etc. So needless to say, it was an invaluable kind of an interaction because she valued me, he valued me. They invited me to think about my career from a different perspective, exposed me to something I was already drawn to, but helped me to better define my interest and then to incorporate it into my own career planning. And so that was really special. But I say that to say I had no knowledge of the field, which is different from arts administration, but that they are closely connected because arts administrators need legal counsel, and you could certainly create a path from one to the other.
And let me say this also. Even in all the nuances, I didn't realize that there was so much distinction between public arts administration and arts administration. So even the nuances of arts management are different and great. And so again, I knew what I wanted to do, but I also was going to be a consultant who taught in an academic university, or a professor at an academic university who consulted with organizations. So I may have been one of those people who I wanted one foot in practice and one foot in theory and research. And so my degrees, when I acquired the Master's in Arts Administration from Indiana University, that it was a program designed for visual artists and performance artists. I, to my knowledge, was the first literary artist who went into that field. And the truth of the matter is I was denied entry because I was a literary artist. And then I had to woo and wow, and I gained entry into the program. But since then, there have been very few literary artists who are arts administrators, yet we have literary arts centers all over everywhere, and literary readings and components and film series connected. But again, that's one of those areas that not many people know, that there's a connector between what you do as artists and what you do as an administrator. So again, I just wanted to say, although I knew there's still nuances to arts managing and different points of entry, and we don't always think about the security person and those type of things. One of the questions, Anthony, that came up, would you have pursued an arts administration degree had you known about it? Because one of the things that I know that you and Cheryl are doing, you're looking at the option of acquiring PhDs, doctorates, to complement your education at this point. But when we talk, you're not necessarily talking about going into arts administration programs to acquire those PhDs. And so there might be some barriers there that we're not aware of. So Anthony, could you talk about that? And then Cheryl, if you want to speak to that, and Ruby, even if you want to speak to that, because some of the work that you're doing with the fellowship component actually would provide entree into these academic programs that for those fellows, it makes them more aware that they need different management skills to survive in both the academic and the practice. And that's, so again, this is the question of what each of us could come in on. And Anthony, would you start off? Would you have,
Sure.
if you had known?
First, I just wanted to highlight in Cheryl's story, there was such an important piece related to mentorship and having a champion that I think is is an urgent and important piece that needs to be identified and also needs to be sort of an urgent call for today. The fact that you had someone who was a professional to share their experiences with you, but also to provide you guidance in your own journey, from what I hear, that was invaluable. And we don't all have that, especially people from historically marginalized groups, and especially those groups working within the arts sector. So I think the importance of mentorship and having a champion, I think is a really important piece, especially now as we think about diversity in arts administration moving forward and who are the future leaders. There are folks working in our sectors now that are working in isolation, that are trying to do systems change work in a vacuum because they don't have the resources and they don't have the community. And so we all need to, those that are working in the field now, those that are experts in our field and doing our work, we need to hold our hand out and be champions for others like we may not have had for ourselves. So I just wanted to say that first. And for me, so I've actually wanted a graduate degree for many years. There were financial hindrances that stopped me, but I always loved learning. I'm a geek at heart. I love to read. I love to be in the classroom. I love to investigate topics of learning. For me, though, pursuing a graduate degree also had to do with what are the financial opportunities that would be afforded to me after. So when I was looking for a degree program, I also had to think about, will this get me a certain type of job? I actually did consider an MBA program at one point, and it actually had less to do with the program and had to do with the piece of paper. As a Black gay man working in the arts sector, I have had, again, I often say that I have 2 decades of experience. And I say that because sometimes I don't know if that's heard. I don't know if that is understood, that I have been doing this work for years. And so for me, I just needed a master's degree at one point just to get me into what I thought would be other opportunities for leadership titles. Over time, I realized I wanted more than just a piece of paper, and I chose organizational change management because I believe that organization development and change is urgent right now for the arts field and actually all sectors. And we're seeing it more and more, especially in this year 2000. Managing change is going to be and is such an important tool and technique that organizational leaders will need to have to navigate all that we are navigating and all that's to come. And while we're in the middle of COVID and we're looking for a vaccine and a cure, fiscal 2022, 2021 is going to be very tough for the field. And so folks, we need leadership in the field that can manage change. And with that, I also believe in the power of promoting and hiring people of color in leadership roles because we've been managing change our whole career. We've been managing conflict. We've been managing interpersonal dynamics. We have been managing microaggressions. We have managed walking the boulder up the hill on our own. And we've done it with grace. And we've done it with internal processes which sometimes have left us burnt out. And so I believe that we need to invest in people of color right now in the arts sector because we are the ones that can move the sector forward. So I went off course a little bit, but if I knew about arts administration, I don't know if I would have chosen it because I would not have known where it could have taken me professionally. And again, I think that's, as a person of color, I have to consider advancement differently than maybe others who may have felt a bit more free. Even being an artist as a kid, my mom told me that's a hobby, that's not a career. And she didn't say that because she didn't care about me or that she didn't believe in the arts. She cared that I would succeed. And so, you know, I think that was a big consideration for me throughout my career. How do I maneuver in a way where I can succeed while also trying to create impact for others? So I don't know.
And I think that's been an experience for many of us who have parents like, well, you know, when I was growing up, it was like you become a doctor or a lawyer. You didn't become an artist because how are you going to feed
That's
yourself
right.
and feed your family? And I think some of that has changed because now you can become a rap singer or entertainer and succeed in some ways. So that becomes part of it. But, you know, and so when we think of entertainment as being slightly different than arts administrator, there are some differences and some distinctions, but I think again, you know, where the nuances are, I think we're still discovering. Anyone else want to weigh in on this part of the conversation? Okay, well, the polls are going good, and what we're finding is what I'm looking at the poll, I'm seeing that a significant people are other. Um, a lot of people are in graduate school, but a lot of people have disciplines as other. We don't know what those others are, but it's it's it exceeds arts administration. So in some ways, they're saying to us in this conversation that our experiences are right. People are coming from other places to these types of conversations, which is good. And I think that has been the experiences of African Americans and ethnic people. Now we move to a crucial question about preparation and training. Are academic institutions with management programs, um, are they meeting the needs of students? I mean, when I went, because most of my environments were Caucasian environments, I required my degrees through Caucasian environments. And right now the push is for to get more arts administration program at HBCUs. And so, and there are very few HBCUs with arts administration programs. Some have theater management, some have visual arts management, but not arts administration per se. There are one or two out there. I don't have those statistics. But as we see the national museums opening up, we see more. Um, we see a focus on the African American Arts uh, Museum Association. They're beginning to develop their policy structures and introducing people to these. What does what is the benefit of an academic degree in arts administration or entertainment and management or and I'm going to start with Ruby on this question because I know Ruby and I have talked about it, and Ruby's conversation is very similar to what Ethnic just said. So Ruby, go ahead and
Yeah, I mean, you know, the thing that is frustrating. So I didn't, like I said, I didn't go the path of traditional higher education, and coming into the field, I come from a predominantly corporate background. So, you know, there's areas where I observe kind of what's been happening. So in, you know, 2008, 2009, we know the recession hit and devastated a lot of the field in terms of middle management and entry level positions. And I think exacerbated what continues to be aggravated in who is holding positional power and who is holding financial stability. And you know, while yes, there have been a number of arts administration programs that have been, you know, date back to the 70s, the 80s, you know, there are a lot of them. For me, and this is my, you know, kind of lived experience observation. So, you know, obviously there's gaps, and obviously I'm coming from a very specific perspective. But for me, I was at the Arts Council in 2008. I watched all of this happening to the field. What really struck me was that I felt there was a surge in monetization of the field by higher education. You really started to see more of the arts administration programs coming forward and saying, "Hey, we're an option. You're not working. You could go to school." But what didn't happen was that the field, in tandem with that monetization, was able to provide pay that supported the debt load that people were then incurring. And so now the other thing that I can't decipher, that I can't get to, is where the field went wrong in requiring a master's degree of any size, shape, or color to have a coordinator job. So let's just talk about that and the detriment to the field, because what's happened now is that I think in the kind of mainstream structures, you see very few people like me anymore. Everybody has lots of pieces of paper behind them. And we are now struggling, I think, as a field to try to figure out how you equate and value education with experience, and where does that put you and where should you be? Because I think in the back before the recession days, getting a degree meant that you could come into that field in a specific way. But getting a degree and then moving into nonprofit, it's erratic and it's sporadic, and it isn't in its own way very inequitable. And then you add all of the other kind of social structures that go with it. You have access to different networks. Keith and I were talking in our prep session around this situation that I discovered as a white colleague was being brought into the organization, and this endorsement that came from someone higher in the organization that she came from to a higher in our organization, that was then shared with the rest of us, that keep an eye on that person because they're going to do great things. That I'm like, that kind of sets them up. Not to say that she hasn't been amazing, she has been, but doesn't that set up an expectation then, and a segue and a platform that why aren't people of color, why aren't we doing that? We should be doing that too. And, so then I'm telling everybody I know, hey, if you know somebody who's moving, you need to send an email, and you need to give them a platform to equalize that this is happening, and we don't even realize that it's happening. Or maybe because I didn't go to higher ed, I don't know that this is part of that, right? And so for me, it's been interesting to watch. And then also how the field has not responded around even just the acknowledgement of what we did to ourselves during the recession, that is now amplified and aggravated by civil unrest and the pandemic. And when you think about the fact that as organizations start to close, as organizations begin furloughs, as organizations drop staff, typically first in, first out, there's been a lot of work around diversity, equity, and inclusion lately. So guess who those first ins are probably looking like, right? And traditionally, we're still seeing, not traditionally, but we're still seeing a substantial amount of people of color in lower entry-level, middle management, if it's available. They're not in positions of power, and so they're probably at risk and at higher risk. As an organization is looking at how it's going to navigate forward, those are things that they need to be thinking about. Nobody wants to be kept just because, but when you're thinking about who do you keep and how do you keep them, and there was a great question in the Q&A from Roberta about what should organizations be thinking about as we get to the other side of this, and how do they continue to strengthen and amplify and embody their commitment to DEI, that it really becomes a time of going outside our traditional networks and reaching beyond the people that and looking at unconventional places, by the white culture mainstream definition, that we know people, and we should be directing people, and we should be helping folks, and organizations really should be thinking about how prepared they are to embrace different perspectives, different voices, different cultures, and to acknowledge those shortcomings as you're interviewing people of color, to bring them into your space so that they're not broadsided or lulled into a false sense of security of what it's going to be like to be within that organization. I think about talent and retention. I mean, Anthony, you said so many things that I started oh my God,
yes. And that's the truth of this conversation. We're not going to get to all the aspects of it, but one of the reasons I took the prescriptive route, I went degree, but I received my MA in Arts Administration 10 years before, or longer before I went into a PhD program, because it still didn't work. Even with degrees, a person of color couldn't get jobs. So when you talk about, you know, the degrees for the entry level position, even those degrees as a person of color wouldn't get me the entry level positions. So that brings us to what does it take to make an organization prepared to receive someone? And why would we send someone of color to an organization? Had I known about, you know, some of these associations have been around a long time, it was not part of my curriculum. But I think that more advancement has come up because of associations, organizations, associations that then through the academic institutions. And I think that was an important point you made, Ruby. And so I want to bring Cheryl into this part of the conversation, though. Cheryl, because you know you went to an HBCU as a graduate student, and it opened doors for you in ways that it hasn't opened doors for people who've gone through non-HBCUs, shall we say.
So my background, I went to the University of Michigan for my bachelor's. My master's is from an HBCU, Clark Atlanta University, and then my law degree is from University of Maryland. So it's in between, it's sandwiched in between the other two degrees. But yeah, you do get something, or I did, I can't speak for everybody, but you do get a different perspective on who you are. You get some attention that you might not ordinarily get. My program was a small one, so I think that it was easier for me to receive a bit of nurturing, to develop the mentorships that Anthony talked about earlier, to have just a bit more focus for me individually. And it was a really positive experience for me. And I think that, for example, I got the opportunity to apply to the Presidential Management, now it's called Presidential Management Fellowship. At that time it was called the Presidential Management Internship, which is a federal program to fast track you into management in the federal government. If you have a public policy degree, you have to be nominated by your educational institution at the time that you are working on your master's, and then you go through a selection process. And I wonder, I don't know, but I wonder if I would have been nominated if I had been in a large program and gotten lost in it. But I was nurtured, and yes, there was competition even within my program, but I still believe that I had a level of support that might have been different than what I experienced in the two PWIs that I went to. There was support in those organizations as well, though, to be perfectly honest. There was support at the time that I was in those institutions, but it was different. But I want to come back to something in terms of arts administration, because our program here at Belmont in the Curve College, we're a College of Entertainment and Music Business, so it's not an arts administration program. We do have a creative entertainment industries program, which is different from our music business program. Music business is a bachelor in business. Creative entertainment industries is not. It's a BA or BS. And we're offering some arts administration courses within that program as something that I would really want it to see happen for our students, to be exposed to something that many students aren't exposed to in terms of what arts administration is, and as a career path that could be open to you if it's something that you wanted to consider. And I would just say, because I'm here on the panel and I'm representing a program that is different in its focus, I want to say that you could consider, and it's going to be different, so this may not be of interest to folks in our audience, but I'm just going to go ahead and say, if one is looking to maximize your options and to think creatively, as I think people of color often do about things. Anthony alluded to this earlier. We think creatively, we have to be resourceful sometimes. You could consider an entertainment business program, and you could maybe go down two paths at the same time. I'm the queen of two paths at the same time. I'm always hedging my bets. I'm always trying to have a plan A and a plan B. I don't know if that's a good thing or not. It's just the path that I have chosen to take, and everybody has their own path. That doesn't work for everybody, and it doesn't appeal to everybody. There's a whole philosophical thing about that. Don't pick a plan B, because then you won't really work on your plan A. To each his or her or their own. But I would say that if you are a person who wants to maximize your options, you might think about inquiring about an entertainment industry or a music business program. The for-profit side is different, obviously, and it does create some different options. It's a whole different world. In terms of skill sets, I don't think it is as different as might be imagined, because if you look at reports that are analyzing what employers want for college graduates, what skills they're seeking, these things are transferable skills: emotional intelligence and collaboration skills, leadership skills, growth mindset. These are transferable skill sets. So you could certainly think about creating some options for yourself that might not fall very neatly into any one particular box. And you might look at, and I know that sounds like I'm selling our program here at the Curb College, and I guess I kind of am. But the program serves students well, and it could serve you well. So that's another option to consider.
And that's what part of this panel is supposed to do, is to say, although something is called entertainment management, it's related to arts administration. It doesn't have to be arts administration. And it's also saying, as a career person, because I'm interested in people who establish career, as a career person, you have to choose the path that's best for you, whatever that path is. And these are options. And as if the organization, because I want to turn to some of the questions before we run out of time. It's like, one of the questions is, how do you advance or move up within an organization that discourage or flat out don't allow you to? Your option is only to leave. The situation, are you working in a white majority space? In some ways, we've all worked in white majority spaces. I was talking to Anthony, and he was saying that he pitched a contract to do diversity education and training. And the thing that happened was that a Caucasian woman received that position, even though his whole life of experiences had been working with diversity. So, but do you leave? It's work. Even if you go into an academic environment where you're one or two students in that environment, what do you do to meet that? So we're gonna take that and try to get to some of the other questions before our time. You want to?
I just want to say something very quickly. So just for additional context, actually, my company, Leading Changemakers, was considered for a DEI consultant role. And because our company was relatively new, however, the people in it were not new to the work of DEI. We had not all been our company had not been afforded, a lot of years of experience with that role. We weren't even considered. But what happens is that there are people who have been afforded titles of DEI in their job titles, or they've gotten the education or certain certifications that certain folks can't afford. I've been doing DEI work within institutions for most of my career, but not in a DEI title. That title has never been used for me. However, I am an expert in doing work of diversity, equity, and inclusion. And I have been leading conferences and conversations around these issues, racial justice, since the mid-90s. And so I don't get the same sort of entry to those opportunities because those words were not added to my name and my company's name. So I think that's one piece. The other piece of DEI right now, organizations have to be really clear with themselves for why they're doing DEI right now. Are you doing DEI right now because you are afraid of being called out for not doing DEI? Or are you really intentional about wanting to create equitable and inclusive workspaces? Some of that is, all of that is the responsibility of leadership and also the people that work in the institution. It's not just one person, it's many people. Everyone has to be involved. You know, allies, white allies have to be involved, but also not be the main voice. I think they have to create spaces for the voices of historically marginalized people who have suffered at the hands of sometimes even allies. And so how do we address toxic workspaces where the one only, or I'm the only that works at, where I've suffered within an institution? How do we start to uncover and unearth that, which sometimes is dark history? That I've been hearing the term dark lately. You know, it's the organization's history. So how do you start to address the history of an organization in a truthful way in order to move forward in an honest and open and inclusive way? Because that's the only way you're going to really start to deal with a culture that supports growth and supports multiple voices.
But I think also, Anthony, that some of the action has to be on the organization and the individual. You have to choose and affirm whether or not you want to stay in that environment and fight the good fight.
That's right.
As many of us have to do. And I tell you, fighting the good fight can be overwhelming sometimes, as I'm sure we all can attest to. But part of it is that when a foundation said, I have this grant opportunity to give to you, but I want to use this list of consultants, you have to say, as an organization of color, I see no consultants who are of color, who are Black and brown people on your list. But that means that you as an organization have to be in a position to turn that consultant or that contract down. And we're often not in a position that we can tell a foundation, you want to give me money, but I can't take the money because you don't have any people who understands my cultural context and who will provide me the best advice. So it's a fine walk that we all walk as individuals and as ones leading organizations. So
can I jump in, Keith?
Yes, jump in. But keep in mind, we're looking at the questions too. We're trying to answer some of them.
Well, I was going to respond to that question along with Anthony. It's always a challenge to make any career decision, to stay in an organization versus to leave one. You have some goals, presumably, that you're trying to accomplish that help to guide that decision. And regardless of whether you stay or whether you go, I think it's important to be solution oriented, because sometimes leaving an organization it will not guarantee that you will not encounter, if you're a person of color, you're taking your color with you. Yes. So you're not leaving that behind. So that means that you have to have some way of thinking about what you will do when you go to this new place, because you're sure to encounter some of the same challenges there that you encountered in the place that you just left. So leaving is not an answer. Leaving is a path to take when you have already executed on a plan that you have already identified. These are the things that I am going to attempt to achieve while I am here. And these are the ways that I am going to attempt to achieve those things. These are the allies, these are the mentors, these are the strategies. This is the stuff I'm going to do myself, excellence, things that I need to know how to do, sharpening my own skills. It's not all on the organization, it's on me to be my best as well, because the organization should benefit from my presence. It's a quid pro quo. We both should get something out of it. So I do all of those things to the best of my ability. I do them to the best of my ability so that before I leave, I know I have put my best foot forward. Now it makes sense to leave. And so once I leave, I can figure that out. And then the last thing I'll say about that is thinking about when to leave, when to stay. If you're leaving because of people, because of some relationship issue, that is not going to change. You will have a new challenge when you get to where you are, because people exist in many, many different personalities and packages that can look the same no matter where you go. But I do think it's helpful to identify, do I have a base of support where I am? Not 100% of the people, but do I have generally a base of support where I am? So even as challenges come my way, I still feel like I have a base of support to help me to deal with those challenges. That's different from being in an organization in which you really feel resourceless. So there are lots of different ways to look at that, but I don't think that leaving is not a strategy. It is a path to take after I have executed a strategy. And then when I go, I have a strategy to help me be effective in the new place.
And I think, go ahead, Ruby.
I just want to add too, though, that not to distract, I'm saying weird words, but I also want to add that permission to say no to engaging. Not every fight is a fight that we have to take on as people of color. And yes, all of these things are going to exist. All of these things are going to happen. And sometimes the growth is on us, which is really hard to, I think, get to, because, even in the journeys that I've had in my career, I have found myself in situations where the last thing I reflected on was if I was experiencing something because of the color of my skin. And I just don't, for me, I don't want to get, I just want to believe in people more than I think they actually can be believed in sometimes. And so because we walk out the door and every decision is a decision that we have to reflect on, and how we're going to show up, and which things are we going to call out, which things are we going to tolerate, which things are we going to allow to victimize us, which things are we going to fight against, who are we going to speak up for on behalf of, because other people aren't as vocal or as strong or as comfortable or as confident, and still all of these things exist. And I think that is also the fatigue in the work that we do, and the work that has to be done. And giving ourselves permission to say no, that this is not my fight, that this is not the thing that I'm going to pick today. And to Cheryl's point about having a strategy, that is part of the strategy. That is part of the things that you need to employ in order to survive. And for me, some days the paycheck is the thing, and you have to move in balance with living your values and your truth, and making sure you can pay the bills and eat. And all of those are very real things. And how do we as people of color support one another within that? Because that is a reality. We cannot, yes, we should always be working to improve and change and fix and dismantle and redress and all the things. And yet at the end of the day, it just can't be that all the time. And I think giving ourselves grace and supporting one another in the fatigue, and helping ensure that we're all getting what we need in the way that we need to get it. I love Cheryl's point about, finding a support system. Sometimes that support system is not going to be inside your organization, and that has to be navigated. That, one, all skin folk and kin folk, so let's just put it out there and be honest about it. And two, friendly, not friends. Always remember that the people that you work with are not always your friends, and your friends are the ones that are going to get you through those really tough times when you want to pick up the phone and call somebody to say, oh my God, you're not going to believe that this colleague is being such a, lots of words that I would normally throw down, but I'm trying to be professional today. And those support systems are going to happen outside of your organization, especially as a person of color. It is sometimes fatal to trust too much and say too much, and expose too much, because sometimes our white colleagues just don't get what we're dealing with, and the extra labor to bring them to the place to understand sometimes is more work than just calling up one of your friends and being like, hey, so remember that element, as well as you're navigating and thinking about, trying to survive. Every environment is going to be a challenge. Everything is going to be work. It's called work for a reason. And I think remembering and acknowledging that has also been really helpful for me as I've navigated many, many years of working in very, very white institutions.
Let me chime in this, because I think you're absolutely right. And I just wanted to get in Susan's question about internships and having difficulties to pay, finding students to place in those internships. It's difficult, but all internships, in my opinion, should be paid. I mean, I realize there's some opportunities, there's a mentorships, and with people who are in college, there is a quid pro quo exchange in some instances for college credit. So that brings in a different perspective. But as much as possible, try to get paid internships, because that is also a barrier. If you have an internship across the country from where you live, how are you going to get there? And then once you get there, how are you going to pay for those types of things? So that's part, and that falls on the organization to understand that when it builds budgets, it has to also build budgets to pay workers, and internships and fellowships. They are workers. They're working towards your mission and your cause. So I wanted to answer that question. I think we answered most of the questions, and we're at time. And but I do want to say that as people move toward HBCUs and historical and institutions that educate Hispanics and others, that you also understand the role that your institution has to play, and that looking at organizational history, and not just from the individual stance, because sometimes what we do is say, well, we have this individual who's the fault, when actually it's the organizational infrastructure that's at fault, and it was there before the individual was there, and will probably be there after the individual leaves, if you don't look at the structure of your programs and your operations. I think this has been a wonderful panel. I hope that it looks like most people have gotten something from the panel. And so these topics we can talk about on and on for hours and hours. And I do hope to see other topics related to this. And I hope to see you leading these topics. And so again, thank you for being a part of this panel, and thank people who attended for attending. Any final words from any of you?
I just wanted to say that for those that do feel isolated in their places of work, change can happen, and often does happen from one person. It is not easy. It will be painful at times. But if it's something that you believe wholeheartedly in and want to commit to, find the resources and community to support you along the way. I think people think that it happens overnight. It does not happen overnight. It almost never happens overnight. It's just find your people to support you, to do the work that you're looking to do. But it is possible to create change. It is possible to tell the truth in spaces where the truth hasn't been told. I think it is okay. It is possible to face facts of microaggressions and challenges without offending. And if you are offending, then that's the work that someone else has to do on themselves.
Okay, and I think there will be a recording of this. I don't know when it becomes available. We tried to get to many questions as possible, and if there are other questions, some people have placed their information in the chat, but AAC knows how to reach me, and we can forward those on to other people. Again, I think a couple of things that Ruby said, and Anthony and others, is every challenge doesn't have to be your challenge. You may say no. You may say to the organization and the people, I thank you. I've helped you identify a problem. It is time for me to move on for my own well-being to another space. And sometimes we have to take care of ourselves by moving to a different space that may, as Cheryl pointed out, become as challenging as the space that you left, but it becomes part of your challenge to take care of yourself by moving to another space, even though that space too may become toxic.
And
So,
I hope that you guys didn't hear me saying don't leave.
no, we didn't hear you say
That
that.
is definitely not what I said.
No, we didn't hear you
Yeah.
say
All
that.
right.
Thank you all. And
Thank
Kendra, is
you.
there any final words?
No, I just want to say thank you to the panel. Thank you to the attendees. You're really appreciated. Please watch out for our upcoming events. And I definitely want to thank Paula. Thank you, Paula.
All right.